Okay, hey guys, welcome back. We're going to switch gears a little bit. We're going to be building off of some of the techniques and tools that we've already gone over. And if you've noticed, the way I've structured things in this course is I like to show you some of the ways that we can use some of these automatic tools, and then later I'll show you some of the more manual ways that we can do things that give you more control. And my hope is that by learning how to do um, these techniques in multiple ways, we're getting a better understanding of Photoshop. So you can see that any problem that you want to attack in Photoshop, you could go about it in a number of different ways. So what I'm going to show you in this video is we're going to go over three more tools. We're going to be kind of switching into some mark making and digital painting techniques, but I thought before that we'd wrap up with just some more photo editing things that you could use as mark making and digital painting techniques as well. But we're going to go over these three tools here, the dodge tool, the burn tool, and the sponge tool. And I debated bringing these tools in earlier just because we've done things in the past that could have benefited from these tools, but I wanted you to get more experience and more practice in with layer selections and how to refine your selections and using layer masks. So these three tools here are destructive tools. So it's if, for example, if I make changes here, I don't see them the same way that I would if I had an adjustment layer. So for example, with this image here, and I'll have images here, so we're going to work on this image, and then the next one will be your weekly exercise, and I'll give you some instructions there. But let's just say, the way that we have been doing things is if I gave you this image and I said, okay, I want you to, I want you to brighten these red mushroom caps and, add some contrast, right? The way that we have been doing things is that you would have had to have made a selection first. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to unlock this. So let's just say, the prior ways we were doing things, right? So I'm going to go ahead and just make a selection here, and I'm not taking any time with this. I'm just, so we can see we have my marching ants, there's my selection. And if I said, okay, now I want you to brighten this and add some contrast, the way you would have done that, or one way to do it, is we could have gone to adjustments, and then we would have just added a brightness contrast adjustment layer. And here we can see I'll mess with the sliders. And there we go. Again, I'm not spending any time. I'm just showing you how we would have done that. And then here we can see that comes up on its own layer mask, and that's the way that we've been doing it. So, which is great. And then now I can see I can turn this on or off, right? We all know how to do this. But let me show you what these tools can do here. So if I have my image, and if I come to the dodge tool. So these are referencing some older photographic techniques when we had developing rooms, and we would have chemicals that we could then adjust our light to expose or underexpose. But these three tools here are going to do similar things. So the dodge tool is used to lighten your image selectively. So rather than choosing a selection and then working inside of that, this will just directly lighten areas in the photograph that I choose. And you have some options up here. So we can choose our brush, right? I'm just going to use a soft round for this. And then we can select our shadows, our midtones, and highlights, right? And then the exposure is how strong of a change that's going to make, right? And then this protect tones, you may or may not want this off, but basically what this does is it will preserve highlights and shadows. And I'll show you what that does here. So I'm just going to be on midtones right now. I'm going to keep exposure to 50%. And let me just zoom in here so you can see it. So remember, dodge is going to lighten. So now if I click here, if I just start moving around, right, we can see it's selecting the midtones, right, and it's lightening those. We can see, right, this is getting a bit brighter, right? Now, notice it doesn't show a layer. I can't turn that on or off, but what I can do is I can come to the history, and just so you can see, so I've used the dodge tool 5 or 6 times here. If I just click back to the first one, we can see what it looked like originally. So that's kind of the thing with these, is they are destructive, so I don't have an easy way of turning on or off that layer, but I can come into the history and I can navigate through those different uses. So that was on midtones. If I select shadows now, it's going to take the shadows and it's going to lighten these shadows up. Okay. And you kind of have to click and hover and move around, and sometimes it's hard to see if you're actually making any changes, but again, that's where you would come in you could see that all those shadows that were there, I lightened up significantly, right? And then if I come back to the very beginning, that's what it looked like. And then this is what it looks like now. So we can see where all those things have been lightened up. And then at the same time, I can come to my highlights, and now I can click and I can really start to brighten all of that as well too. So this is giving you a bit more control as a painter, right? As a doing things without kind of automatic guesswork that Photoshop might be doing. This gives you the exact control over very specific areas, right? So then that protect tones has been on, right? So I'll show you, let me show you. I'm going to just come back to the very beginning here. Okay, and so with protect tones on, what that's doing is, if we see the shadows that are in there, basically, let's use this area right here where the shadow is here. If I come into my midtones, and let's just say I want to lighten this up, as I keep coming in and working here, it basically will keep the shadows and the highlights more or less kind of the same. We can see that green is lightening up. We can see some of these other areas are lightening up. Actually, let me come to shadows. So that might be more appropriate. Okay, so I'm lightening up the shadowed areas here. Okay, and we see that that's not really changing that much. But if I turn this off, now watch. If I come in here and I start moving and lightening that, we can see how that lightens up significantly, right? So just knowing when to turn that on or off is up to you. Usually you would want that on, but like I said, it just kind of depends on your image. So let me come out here. So that's the dodge tool, okay? So that's used to selectively lighten areas in your image. Now if we come to burn, okay, this does the exact opposite thing. This will now selectively darken areas that you pick, right? And it operates the same way. So we have shadows, midtones, and highlights. I'll come into this mushroom again. I'm on midtones. So now if I click and I start moving around, it's selecting those middle areas and it's darkening things up. And usually if you're working with the blur and the dodge tool, you really want to make sure you have make sure your hardness is down. I mean, you can work any way you'd like, but it'd be a lot smoother if you have nice, soft blending and merging between the things that you're doing. So we see that's darkening things up quite a bit. Let me go to my highlights, right? I can darken these highlights. Okay. So you have a lot more control, but in some ways you have less control because you can't necessarily see what's happening here. You have to come into your history, and then if I come back, we can see I can see where those stages were, but it's not the same with a layer where I could then make adjustments to that layer. Okay, so I mean, one good way that the dodge and burn tool can work, right, is you can really just have control over very specific elements without having to make a selection or refine a selection first. So that's those two there, the dodge and the burn tool. The sponge tool, the last one that we're going to go over here, the sponge tool works by affecting the saturation. Now you can either saturate or desaturate. So right now I'm on desaturate, so that's going to take the color away. Okay, so if I come in here and I just click and I start moving around, it's basically just, it's taking the color away. And if I do this, if I keep doing this and keep going, I'll eventually just get a black and white grayscale, right? And you can adjust so the flow is how strong of a change that's going to happen. And here, so we have saturate and desaturate. So again, if I just come in here, if I just keep going and keep going, I'm eventually just going to get black and white, okay? And this vibrance here, that does the same thing, very similar to that protect colors from earlier. What vibrance does, so right now it's off, so everything is being changed, but let me just move to, so these greens right here are super saturated, and what vibrance does is if there are hues that are fully saturated or fully desaturated, it'll leave them alone. It won't do anything to them if you have that checked off, right? So right now, I'm going to turn this on. So that means that it's going to leave fully saturated or fully vibrant colors alone. So I'm on desaturate here. If I come in here and if I click, and if I start kind of moving around to darken this up, or sorry, to desaturate, we can see it's turning some stuff into gray, but can you see how that grass green is not really being affected, right? That's because vibrance is on. Now if I turn that off and come in, if I click and I start moving around, right, and it takes a little bit, so you can see now that green is starting to be affected and it's getting desaturated, right? So now I have a nice little black and white patch right here. But again, so vibrance was off on that part there, okay? All right, so those are those three tools, and again, they are destructive, so you can't see them here, but like I said, if I come here, I can come all the way back up to where I first used that sponge tool and I get that color back. So with those three tools, what I'd like you to do in the weekly exercise is this is the image that I'll have you work on, and there's written instructions to follow here, but just using these three tools, the dodge, the burn, and the sponge tool, I'd like you to darken the image. I mean, use some of your own aesthetic judgment here and be creative, but just using those three tools, let's go ahead and darken some of this up, right? And then we can use the burn tool, or sorry, yeah, we use the burn tool to darken some of this up. The dodge tool, for example, could be used to lighten her eyes and the butterfly. And then the sponge tool, I'd like you to desaturate the image except for the eyes and the butterfly, right? So you're going to be playing with the contrast here manually. Now, again, we could have just made an adjustment layer and affected the brightness and contrast, and we could have done things this way, right? But now we have more skills and more control, so I want you to do it manually, right? So let's manually adjust this image using those three tools. Again, so the written instructions will follow there, but let's darken and desaturate the image, and then brighten and perhaps saturate the eyes and the butterfly. So we're going to get some nice contrast, some nice color changes, right? But overall, right, we can take out some of this color and bump up some color in the eyes and the butterfly. Okay, so have fun with that, and we'll move on to the next video.